What do you find are some of the most frequently like undertrained muscle groups, or the frequently just like neglected types of training that people are doing that are leading them to more injury as they get older? And what are some of the things that we need to be training from a modality and a muscle group standpoint to make sure that we can prevent injury as we get older?
Yeah, I think from that perspective, it's think about muscles that just don't get quite as involved, or they are involved, but not quite as involved in kind of the movement patterns that you put yourself through. Uh, think like hinging patterns, squat patterns, pressing patterns, pulling patterns, things like that. Kind of those main movement patterns that you'd be doing when you press or row or squat or deadlift or something like that. So things like your abductors, your abductors, those smaller glute muscles around the hip, your adductors, your adductors, which are just the muscles that are in the internal part of your upper leg, that help pull your leg more medial towards the midline, towards kind of the center of your body. Um, and so a lot of those trying to move in different planes under resistance, under load is a great way to train those tissues. Because I mean, we spend a ton of time in the sagittal plane, right? Think about the sagittal plane as the plane you're in when you walk, right? It's everything's forward. We don't quite do much, especially in normal strength training. It's, depending on if you've been in it for a while, or if you're just getting into it, most things are programmed kind of within that sagittal plane. And so it's trying to get in these other planes of motion. You don't have to, I don't really subscribe to, looking at different planes of motion and programming specific to that. But I do think about moving through different planes of motion, whether that's in my strength training or it's being sure that I'm doing things outside of training that help facilitate that, like trail running or playing basketball or whatever that is. I'm trying to have more movement freedom when I can within that training, because usually in the gym, I do spend more time within that sagittal plane, kind of that one plane of motion. Um, but I've definitely added a lot more rotational stuff to my training as of late. I've added a lot more, again, abductor, kind of think about those muscles on the outside of the hip versus the inside of the hip and the upper leg. And so I'd say those are a big thing. And then abs, core. I think people tend to, one, they're not, you're either super into training your core or you're not. There's not really a middle ground. I've found, either have clients begging me for it or clients telling me that they absolutely don't want to do it ever. Please don't make me do this. So it's usually don't live in the middle there. But I think having a balanced relationship with training your core again through different planes of motion, both from a actively think about actively rotating under load versus resisting rotation under load are two very important aspects of that core. Uh, and I believe that core extends, that's your spinal erectors, that's your low back, your mid back. That's everything that would involve having a stable core. If someone, if you're in a position where you're like, that person has a strong core versus they don't, you kind of know generally it's most of your torso and leading into your hips that your core is involved with. And so having just a strong foundation to be centered around, I think is extremely important. Um, and so that tends to be the muscles that I see neglected the most because they're not included. You have to go out and kind of search for those movements more so than stumbling upon them.